Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. The South China Sea. It is a vast landscape. Within these last hours, Beijing announces, this report from Voice of America, that it plans to start regular civilian patrols in the South China Sea. A vessel said to be based in the Paracel Islands will begin patrolling the waters of the South China Sea. This area is one of the disputed seas off the coast of China. It is part of the conversation right now about what is the PLA Navy's mission. Is this confrontational? Is this security? Is this guarding the sea lanes because China needs oil from the Middle East and this is part of the transportation route, if you look at your map? Or is this about future conflict? Is China rising? Is the Middle Kingdom back? Is this, the Europeans have a fancy term for this, revanchism. We want it back. We were the empire. We will be again. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com joins me. Gordon, you know the answers to all those questions, so I'll introduce our guest tonight and we'll ask him. Good evening, Gordon.
Good evening, John.
We're cheerful tonight. We're going to talk about corruption in the executive suites of the People's Republic of China. The big boss himself has a troubling brother-in-law who spends part of his time or his money in the British Virgin Islands and Samoa. But that's later. Now the mystery of what's the PLA Navy up to. Walter Lohman, Director of Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation, joins us. Walter, a good new year to you. And I plunge immediately to the question at hand. Most recently, an admiral in the American Navy, an admiral in charge of the Pacific Command, Locklear, has commented that China's growing power in Asia is part of the challenge for the American Navy. That growing power, last time I checked, they have aspirational blue water Navy. At this point, does China represent a threat to our forces in the Pacific, in your opinion? Good evening to you, Walter.
Good evening. And well, I don't think they represent sort of a traditional, conventional military threat to our forces. But I mean, you could easily see an accident breaking out where, because of their reckless behavior, we end up in some sort of confrontation with them. I think that's a very plausible scenario.
Walter, December 5th, the Cowpens, which is a guided missile cruiser, was operating in the South China Sea, observing China's only aircraft carrier and its support ships, and a Chinese vessel cut within 100 yards in front of the Cowpens. This is an extremely dangerous maneuver that the Chinese were executing, and this is after decades of trying to cooperate with the Chinese Navy. It really seems that our assumptions about the way China should operate, should be a partner, should be a provider of security, just seems to be 100% wrong. There's a quote from someone Dean Chang of Heritage Foundation, and Dean says that the assumptions of the Navy are incorrect when it comes to China. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, in that same statement that Admiral Locklear made, he also talked about the fact that these sorts of incidents, like the Cowpens incidents, is attributable to a lack of training, or that officers down the line in the Chinese Navy just don't understand how to do this. They don't know how we do things. In fact, I think getting closer to what Dean says, they know exactly what they're doing, and they have orders to challenge the U.S., which challenges the fundamental mission that the U.S. Navy has provided there for 70 years, guarding the sea lanes and providing for security for international shipping. I don't think that's what the Chinese have in mind at all. They have in mind establishing themselves and reclaiming territory that they think is theirs and reclaiming their position in the region.
Yeah, it seems to me, the Navy's got two problems. First of all, there is a hardware issue. They need to probably have more stuff out in the Pacific. But that seems to me to be the lesser of the two problems. The main problem of the U.S. Navy is that it doesn't recognize, at least publicly speaking, and I think it's probably what they think anyway, they do not recognize that the Chinese don't want to be our partners. They don't want to help us maintain security. They don't want to help support public goods in Asia. They are the ones that are undermining security. They're the ones that are a threat to everybody. This is the Navy's real problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and if you look at their behavior, it tells you that. So, to continue to maintain that maybe they can be our partner in providing security, we just have to talk to them more, we just have to engage them more, we have to train them more. Maybe we need to give them the sort of a training that our guys have so they can be better at this. I mean, to continue that in the face of all that happens and the ineffectiveness, all the various forums that we are engaged with them in, is just crazy. I mean, I think Admiral Locklear, I don't know him personally. I don't know, I haven't talked to him about this, but I mean, the Navy generally has an institutional bias towards engaging the PLA Navy. They think that through, consistent contact, they're going to be able to change the way they look at the world. And I just think that's terribly naive.
60% of our vessels are said to be devoted to the Pacific Command by 2020. In other words, over these next years. Is that enough, Walter, in your opinion right now? You're looking at the map. This is a vast landscape, and China's pushing back.
Oh, man, yeah. I mean, 60% of fewer ships may not actually be an increase over time. And even if it were an increase, you got to think about the types of ships and the number that's going to be involved eventually. If you end up with 10 more ships in the Pacific, is it really going to make that much difference over that vast territory? Now, if 2 of those ships are aircraft carriers, then now you're talking. But, it's such a kind of throwaway rhetorical device that the Defense Department used to declare, this part of our pivot. There would be 60% of our ships there. But, it doesn't really matter much until you get into the details of it.
I'm reading a book about Japan, 1941, right now. And rather than trot out the parallels, I ask you, Walter, do you think about that? You work on the Pacific Command or the Asia Pacific all the time, and you see these statements from the Chinese. Do they remind you of the rise of the Japanese in the early 20th century?
Well, what reminds me most of the Japanese is the way that the Chinese are regarded in Washington. I mean, that is, I don't know if your book goes into it, but there were a lot of statements regarding Japanese capabilities in the 30s and 20s, the idea that they would never be able to get to the stage where they could really cause any problems. And it reminds me of Admiral Keating, one of Locklear's predecessors, who used to always make the point that, aircraft carriers are really difficult things to man, and it's going to take them a long time to get this. I mean, they will have up and running 3 or 4 of them before you know it. So I think what the parallel I see most clearly is underestimation of a rising power.
Do you believe that the Obama administration right now sees China as a threat, as a partner, as an unknown? Choose one, Walter.
I think they persist in seeing them as a partner that's just a little bit misunderstood, and that if we can just get through to them, if we can talk to the right people, if we can put it in the right terms, if Vice President Biden can engage them the way that he is able to engage people, that we can get them to see the world the way we see it, and we can bring them around. You have differences, I think, in DOD and other places, but I think the White House, I think that's the way they see China.
Walter Lohman is Director of Asia Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. I'm John Batchelor.